The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. Even with unlimited information at our fingertips, the majority of people have still chosen the status quo of shallow intellectualism. They prefer the comforts of life instead of the truth, and they will happily live a lie if that truth threatens to destabilize their world. I think it's safe to say that a lot of people prefer the illusion of wisdom and settle for simplicity. Instead of a faithful and honest look at the problems we face, people seemingly prefer elementary instructions from the powers that be. But that's not the full story. The illusion of knowledge. Cram them full of non-combustible data. Chock them so damn full of facts that they feel stuffed. Make them feel absolutely brilliant with information, and then they will feel like they're thinking. They will get a sense of motion without actually moving, and they'll be happy, because facts of that sort do not change. The thing is, nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. And as Isaac Newton said, you can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. And truly, that's where we are. Never underestimate the human ability to F things up. You know, most of what we see happen on the political stage is a consequence of human nature, and that's one aspect that I believe is not accounted for enough. Politically speaking, we all have a lot more in common than people want to admit, mainly because they have successfully turned politics into a team sport. However, if you strip all of that away, you'll notice a few common links between all parties. Both sides have lost touch with the American dream. They have this sinking feeling that the future we were all promised never materialized, or simply left us behind. I like to call it the hopeful future paradigm. Now, this does push people towards new ideas. However, desperation often dictates the path. As I said, human nature is truly driving everything. We have the same problems, and those problems reside in the ignorant ruling class above everything else. The difference, though, is in the solutions. Yes, it is. The left's desperation is driving them towards socialism or communism, and the right is equally disenfranchised but typically trend towards populism. However, I did hear a new one recently, MAGA communism. Yes, that right there is the epitome of contradictions. Now, the arguments from all the socialist, communist types, well, they all follow the same line of thinking. You know, capitalism failed, free market principles do not work because it just leads to crony capitalism. Corruption has destroyed it. And you know, that is kind of true. Even the stock market is rigged via dark pool money and short selling. We do have a serious problem with corruption, and you will not hear an argument from me dismissing that. No. I just personally believe that rooting out that corruption and returning to actual free market principles would be wildly more beneficial to humanity than anything else. Regardless, I feel their pain. I truly do. The thing is that you don't even have to argue the economics of this idea, communism. It truly doesn't matter. In fact, it's an exercise in futility. The economic debate between these two ideas, communism or capitalism, doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things because human nature dominates the space. If you give anyone, and I do mean anyone, the power that centralized government demands, they will use it to harm you. They will stomp on your freedom, and your pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness is just going to be rendered to the margins. And really, wealth distribution is the biggest fallacy of it all. The ones in charge will funnel your funds to their bank accounts. The only distribution of wealth will be siphoning your wealth to them. And then, of course, they're going to use the power of the state to cover up their crimes and, jail people for speech. Of course they will, because they always do. So, that's what you're going to get. The only way to move forward towards a common future is by decentralized power. We have a lot of issues, but the constitutional republic is the best system we have. My point is simple. You cannot trust humans with that much power. You simply can't. Human nature demands this decentralized system. It's the only way. There is no such thing as benevolent use of power in a centralized fashion. It is always going to be corrupted by weak-minded people whose only moral compass is dictated by personal gain. I mean, how many times do we have to kill millions and millions of people? How many times do we have to trust our future in the hands of disassociated bougie pricks? How many times must we try the same idea and expect different results? It's the definition of insanity. We already know what happens when you hand over your autonomy to a group of people who hold the aspirations of global dominance. So why do we consistently fall back into failed ideas and concepts? Well, again, a universal truth in politics, power above all. And how do they get there? Well, that's through propaganda and social conditioning. Guiding humanity in a certain direction that offers you more power. Well, that's the name of the game. And honestly, in my opinion, there is no true ideological slant to what's happening. At least, not in a traditional sense. Now, this is just my opinion, okay? But I don't think the establishment believes in communism, Marxism, they don't believe in democracy, and they don't believe in the republic. They are not tied to any one ideology. They use ideologies to further their own ambition. It's a tool. And what do I mean by that? Well, they have primed multiple generations to hand power over to them in the name of some Marxist revolution, when in fact, they do not care about that at all. It is just a tool they can use to gain said power. In fact, through this, there are many people who are willingly going to hand it over. So yeah, I believe this push for socialism is just a manipulation. They are trying to give the young generation an ideology that can anchor them to the establishment's own political ambition, and in doing so have tricked them into believing that they're actually helping the world too, or pursuing some kind of justice. It's kind of brilliant, in a very, very sinister way. However, in fact, I would argue that the powers that be have transcended these political labels. They just use these factions to slowly move the public towards their end goal, you know what I mean? Now, the reason, in their eyes, is because we are entering a new phase of human development, and that calls for a new form of governance. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, just remember that global entities simulate world events. They wargame everything, and I really do mean everything. And on top of that, they write compelling papers on what to expect in the future. So, we're going to take a look at the UN report from 2002, entitled The Great Transition. Now, these future scenarios give us insight into their minds too, and to me, it gets pretty dark. But first, we have a few other things to talk about. There are some misconceptions about our reality. One of them is the fact that, on an individual level, most people believe that they are immune to being manipulated, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. Most people also believe that it's incredibly difficult, complicated, and damn near impossible to manipulate entire populations. Now, I don't know, but from my vantage point, I think that's as far from the truth as you can get. Just keep in mind, due to the internet, it's not as easy as it used to be. That's why today it all seems very heavy-handed. However, they still deploy the same tactics. Anyway, think of society in an abstract manner. There are things, people, ideas, social constructs guiding society, and this happens through all means and methods. It's kind of like a sheepdog. Once a subsect of the population begins to move away from the group, that's when they're activated. Stop, that's a dangerous idea. And then, they try to correct course. A story here, a story there, perhaps a movie, media, culture, influencers, doesn't really matter. A little nudge in one direction or the other, that's all it takes. And then human nature, psychology, group dynamics, it all naturally takes its course. There is a reason why psychological warfare groups use terms like nudge units. It's all about subtle moves to affect public perception. Now, if you take a step back and look around you, really contemplate what you see happen in the political realm. You are being quote-unquote nudged constantly. Yes, that is right. In the digital age, propaganda and mass manipulation reign supreme. People pushing back against this quote-unquote nudging is also leading to a crazy censorship push too. We are interfering with their plans a little too much, and I implore you to go even harder. Now, the reason I say that is because this trend towards authoritarianism is all in the name of a grand idea. Now, it might be delusional, but it's still quite grand. Now, one aspect that people have a real hard time wrapping their head around is the fact that we really do have people in charge who believe they have the power to dictate the future, that they can mold humanity into their vision. They believe that they have divine dictate to choose which future we have. Now, with that being said, they aren't exactly wrong. They really are driving humanity off a cliff in pursuit of this vision. As people sleepwalk through their day-to-day life, they are behind the scenes influencing and changing our path. However, let's play devil's advocate, with quite a bit of speculation too. Now, I don't know if this is a case, or even if I believe this to be the case. Just think of this next section as kind of like a thought experiment. So, I am sorry, but we have to do a little bit of background. I know, we talk about it all the time, but it's real fast, trust me. So, since World War II, we had the liberal economic order. In the 1970s, we got off the gold standard, and the stage was set for global economic collapse in the future, the petrodollar. It was very profitable in the short term, but they all knew this economic set was unsustainable. That was kind of the whole point. A transition needs to happen, am I right? So the global economy was based on the fossil fuel industry, the petrodollar. So let's just say that the petrodollar is holding us back because scientific advancements have made fossil fuels obsolete. Do you remember that story about the breakthroughs in nuclear fusion? Or perhaps you remember when we talked about the advancements in quantum computing, how it no longer has to be in negative 460-degree climate-controlled rooms. They can now create quantum microchips that can operate flawlessly at room temperature. Now, people assume this means we're heading for some type of, Jetson-style future with anti-gravity trains and limitless energy. Well, let's say that is true. If you have a massive scientific advancement like that, and fossil fuels become redundant, in the next 50 years or so, well, that means the entire global economic system is now a ball and chain attached to humanity's metaphorical leg. You cannot roll out new tech, new energy sources, if our entire world is based on a monetary system of years past, right? You follow me? Okay, for now let's go off the assumption that we have this new energy source. It got stuck somewhere in the bowels of a black budget project, and they need to figure out a way to not only monetize it, because trust me, they're never going to give you free energy. However, on top of that, they also have to figure out a way to introduce it to the world. And so they devise a plan to wean the human species off of old energy sources and move us into the next phase of human development. Now, they have to demonize the fossil fuel industry to prime the public for the destabilization effects of the looming massive change. And yes, you guessed it, that's where Agenda 2030 and the Great Reset come into play. Fear is designed into their messaging. Yes, they need people to panic and become susceptible to accept the changes. In fact, they need people to be so afraid that they demand it, which is exactly why they start young with indoctrination. You know, a lot of people are having some sort of, existential crisis over climate change, and that's all due to propaganda. It's all about priming a new generation, regardless of the psychological effects. It is pretty sinister, and offers a window into their mentality. They will sacrifice you for the greater good, no doubt about it. Anyway, just so happens the power play lies in the details, or I should say the devil lies in the details. They have devised a new centralized system that offers them, at the very least, the same amount of control over the new system as they had with the old system, central bank digital currency. However, the truth is, they have designed new levels of power into their plans, and as a result, they will wield more control over your life than ever before. But I do want to focus on one other reason for their power play. If you plan to destabilize society to the degree in which they are, chaos is simply an expected consequence. And yes, they have a plan for it, it's true. As I said before, it's very, very tough to predict the madness of people, which means they need more control measures to ensure things, don't spiral out of control. And so, maybe that's the main reason for digital ID and social credit. That offers them the ability to manage and corral the masses into a desired direction while persecuting those who stand against it. Simply because when you're dealing with the idea of transitioning the entire human race into a new paradigm, well, discarding certain groups or ruling with an iron fist, well, that's just par for the course. After all, it's for the greater good, right? That right there is one of the most dangerous concepts known to humanity. And don't forget, all things truly wicked start from innocence. Yes, they can call you a conspiracy theorist and they can dismiss these conversations as the ravings of a madman, but I see it plain as day, and I think you do too. I mean, they openly write about it. The main point I'm trying to get at is facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. I mean, they really are trying to transition the entire human race into a new paradigm. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, you can decide for yourself. In my opinion, I know we can't stay stagnant, we have to move forward. However, we do have to move forward with personal freedom as the core principle. And currently, we are not doing that. So finally, let's talk about the UN report, The Great Transition, the Promises and Lures of Our Time. So this came out in 2002. Remember that because their predictions were pretty spot on. They start off with a quote from Karl Popper, the man who devised the quote-unquote open society concept that later influenced George Soros and his, yeah, you guessed it, the Open Society Foundation. And I quote, "The future is always present as a promise, a lure, and a temptation." So let's read through the opening. So to me, you could argue certain parts of the paper come off as hopeful for the future. However, my point is the steps to get there are quite dystopian, and will have an outsized effect on what kind of future we actually get. Once you go down this path of totalitarianism, it is very, very difficult to jump off that train. By using violence, force, and just authoritarian tactics to get this future, well, it's going to be tainted from the start. The big thing here is that they expect, yes, they expect to use force against innocent people to ensure this transition. It is madness. Anyway, and I quote, "The global transition has begun. A planetary society will take shape over the coming decades, but its outcome is in question. Current trends set the direction of departure for this journey, not its destination. Depending on how environmental and social conflicts are resolved, global development could branch into dramatically different pathways. On the dark side, it's all too easy to envision a dismal future of impoverished people, cultures, and nature. Indeed, to many, this ominous possibility seems the most likely, but it's not inevitable. Humanity has the power to foresee, to choose, and to act. While it may seem improbable, a transition to a future of enriched lives, human solidarity, and a healthy planet is possible. And this is that story. So, you see what I mean? They inject some hope in there, and I guess they kinda have to if they're gonna try to sell this prison planet idea. And I quote again, "It is a work of analysis, imagination, and engagement. As analysis, it describes the historic roots, current dynamics, and future perils of world development. As imagination, it offers narrative accounts of alternative long-range global scenarios and considers their implications. As engagement, it aims to advance one of these scenarios, the Great Transition, by identifying strategies, agents for change, and values for a new global agenda." So, do you see that right there? To advance strategies, agents for change, and values for a new global agenda. So, in the next section here, they mention the beginning of Agenda 21 at the Earth Summit in Rio, which we have talked about many, many times. And I quote, It has been 2 decades since the notion of sustainable development entered the lexicon of international jargon, inspiring countless international meetings and even some action. But it is our conviction that the first wave of sustainable activity, in progress since the Earth Summit of 1992, is insufficient to alter alarming global developments. A new wave must begin to transcend the palliative and reforms that until now may have been muted by the symptoms of unsustainability, but it cannot cure the disease. A new sustainability paradigm would challenge both the viability and desirability of conventional values, economic structures, and social arrangements. It would offer a positive vision of a civilized form of globalization for the whole human family. Yeah, I doubt that. Anyway, let's continue. 4 major events of change acting synergistically could drive a new sustainability paradigm. Now, this next part is crazy. This is exactly what I mean when I say they have transcended current political labels. And I quote, the 4 agents of change. 3 of these are global actors, intergovernmental organizations, transnational corporations, and civil society acting through non-government organizations and spiritual communities. Ah, yes, that's the one world government. We have government merging with transnational corporations, that's fascism. And of course, that would interact with civil society through NGOs and philanthropic endeavors, such as, people like Bill Gates. And then of course, they want to get the religious groups on board. So yeah, the old one world religion, huh? Now the 4th one is less tangible, but very critical to them. And I quote, wide public awareness for the need for change and the spread of values that underscore quality of life, human solidarity, and environmental sustainability. Ah yes, we need to brainwash people with propaganda and plant the seed for change. So they go on to say that global change is accelerating and contradictions are deepening. New ways of thinking, acting, and being are urgently needed. So yeah, there's that behavior modification part. I just don't understand how they don't see how effed up this whole thing is. It's crazy. But as surely as necessity is the spur for a great transition, the historic opportunity to shape an equitable world of peace, freedom, and sustainability is the magnet. This is the promise and lure of the 21st century. The audacity of them to mention freedom in here. The whole paper outlines how they are trying to manipulate the world into acting a certain way and removing the freedom of choice. I cannot stress enough that they are moving the entire human race into a new phase of evolution. I wish people could start to think a little bit bigger, because they certainly are. In their eyes, we are at this takeoff section that you can see right here. This is our new transition. Acceleration is going to happen fast, leading to widespread chaos. And then, they hope will even out and stabilize at a later date. As you can see, we have some charts here depicting past historical transitions dating back to the Stone Age. And I quote, with the emergence of proto-humans some 5 million years ago, and especially Homo sapiens about 200,000 years ago, a powerful new factor, cultural development, accelerated the process of changes on the planet. Cultural change moves at warp speed relative to the gradual process of biological evolution, and the still slower process of geophysical change. A new phenomena, human history, entered the scene in which innovation and cultural information, the DNA of evolving societies, drove a cumulative and accelerating process of development. With the advent of historical time came a new type of transition. It resides between the phases of human history that demarcate important transformations in knowledge, technology, and the organization of society. Naturally, the course of history is not neatly organized into idealized transitions. Real history is an intricate and irregular process conditioned by specific local factors, serendipity, and volition. The historic record may be organized in different ways, with alternative demarcations between important periods. Yet, a long view of the broad contours of the human experience reveals 2 sweeping macro transformations. From Stone Age culture to early civilization roughly 10,000 years ago, and from early civilization to the modern era. And we are now in the midst of a 3rd significant transition. We argue toward what we shall refer to as the planetary phase of civilization. The planetary phase, yes, that's where we are. So why don't we take a look and see how they have this mapped out. In this table right here, you can see it's defined into 3 subsections: organization, economy, and communication. And so let's start with communication first. So the Stone Age had language, early civilization was depicted by the advent of writing. The modern era was printing, and the planetary phase is the internet. Now let's go to economy. The Stone Age was hunter-gatherer, and then we got settled agriculture. And then we have the modern era, which consisted of the industrial revolutions, of which we are now entering the 4th. And then of course we have the planetary phase, and they have listed here globalization. And then this right here is really telling. So with organization, we go from Stone Age, tribe and village, early civilization, which was a city-state, the modern era, which was nation-state, and then right here we have the planetary phase, global government. Oh, no, that's just a conspiracy theory. Yeah, okay. The claim that a planetary phase of civilization is taking shape does not deny the importance of economic expansion and interdependence in early areas. Indeed, the increasing imprint of human activity on nature and the expanding reach of dominant nations were necessary antidotes of globalization. The essence of the premise of a planetary transition is that the transformation of nature and the interconnectedness of human affairs has reached a qualitatively new stage. Growing human population and economies inevitably must butt against the resource limits of a finite planet. And there we go, the limits to growth. And I quote again, okay? I know, a lot of reading in here, but just stay with me, it's interesting. The increasing complexity and extent of society over hundreds of millennia must at some point reach the scale of the planet itself. That point is now. Planetary dynamics operating at global scales increasingly govern and transform the components of the Earth's system. Globally connected information and communication technology penetrates to the furthest outposts, changing values and cultures while triggering traditional backlash. New global governance mechanisms such as the World Trade Organization and international banks begin to supersede the prerogative of the nation-state. Yes, the World Trade Organization is superseding the nation-state. Well, we know why Klaus Schwab and George Soros demand the end of the nation-state, don't we? It's to move us into this new planetary phase. A complex mix of despair and fundamentalist reaction feeds the globalization of terrorism. All of these are signs that we have entered a new planetary phase of civilization. These phenomena are the legacy of the last 1,000 years, which brought us to the threshold of planetary society. From the first flickering of the humanistic sensibility nearly 1,000 years ago, through the intellectual and theological upheaval of the scientific revolution, to the firestorm of capitalist expansion, modernism challenged the authority of received wisdom, the paralysis of birthright and class rigidity. The culmination was the Industrial Revolution of the last 2 centuries. It fused a host of modern developments, law-governed institutions, market economies, and scientific ingenuity, and tapped into the human potential for accumulation, acquisition, and innovation. A permanent revolution in technology, culture, and desire spawned an explosion of population, production, and economic complexity. Ever hungry for new markets, resources, and investment opportunities, the self-expanding and colonizing industrial system began its long march towards a world system. And so, the world has now entered the planetary phase, the culmination of accelerating change and expansion of the modern era. A global system is taking shape with fundamental differences from previous phases of history. We would search in vain for a precise moment that demarcates the origin of this new era. The past infuses with the present. Surely, the advent of world trade 100 years ago, the 2 world wars of the 20th century, and the establishment of the UN in 1948 were early signals. However, they do say critical developments happened between 1980 and the present. So, number 1, they have the global environment. The world becomes aware of climate change, the ozone hole, and threats to biodiversity, and the human race has its first Earth Summit. And then they have technology. The personal computer appears at the beginning of the period, and the internet is at the end. We then have a revolution in communication and information. From there, biotechnology is commercialized for global markets. And then we have geopolitics. The USSR collapses, the Cold War ends, and a major barrier to hegemonic world capitalist systems is removed. New concerns appear on the geopolitical agenda, including environmental security, rogue states, and global crime and terrorism. So, economic integration. All markets, commodity, finance, labor, and consumer are increasingly globalized. And then from there we have institutions, which is pretty much going hand in hand with economic integration. They have listed here new global actors such as the World Trade Organization, transnational corporations, and internationally connected civil society. The schematic right there suggests that we are in the early phase of an accelerating transition. In this turbulent period, the character of the global system that will emerge from this transition cannot be predicted. The ultimate shape of things to come depends to a great extent on human choices yet to be made and actions yet to be taken. Okay, so I'm going to leave a link to this paper. They talk about 1776 and even the effects that 9/11 had on this transition. All sorts of events led to this exact moment. It's interesting and definitely worth a look at. However, I do want to skip to the world scenarios. Remember, they wargame everything, and I do mean everything. And I'm going to prove that to you right now. So, let's talk about these global scenarios. And I quote, "What global futures could emerge from the turbulent changes shaping our world? To organized thinking, we must reduce the immense range of possibilities to a few stylized storylines that represent the main branches. To that end, we consider three classes of scenarios: conventional worlds, barbarization, and the Great Transition. So to start off, we have conventional worlds. This assumes the global system in the 21st century evolves without any major surprise, sharp decline, or fundamental transformations in the basis of human civilization. So yeah, that just means that we just keep on moving forward without any major events, no disruption of services, no mass death, and no chaos. So yeah, I highly doubt that one's gonna happen. And then from there, we have barbarization, which foresees the possibilities that these problems are not managed. Yes, instead they cascade into a self-amplifying crisis that overwhelms the coping capacity of any conventional institution. Civilization descends into anarchy or tyranny, and the UN believes this is the most likely. And then of course we have the Great Transition, the focus of this essay. It envisions profound historical transformations in the fundamental values and organizing principles of society. New values emerge that emphasize the quality of life and material sufficiency, human solidarity and global equity, and affinity with nature and environmental sustainability. Yeah, this is the one they're aiming for. So they have two variants for the Great Transition. One of them is referred to as eco-communalism and the new sustainability paradigm. So the first one is a vision of bioregionalism, localism, face-to-face democracy, and economic autarky. So they go on to say it's difficult to visualize a plausible path from the globalizing trends of today to this eco-utopia that does not pass through some sort of barbarization. So, in other words, you cannot have your eco-utopia without the complete breakdown of society and civilization. So, the future they are aiming for will undoubtedly bring about the chaotic times that they are wargaming. They expect this to happen. And so with that being said, let's talk about the breakdown and then barbarism. And yeah, it's important to talk about this because they believe this is a foregone conclusion. They believe this is our path. And so, as you can see, they have it broken down into a couple possibilities. So they have market forces, policy reform, and then fortress world. Now, fortress world is what we're going to focus on in a minute. So in this scenario, fortress world, it's essentially just a police state. They say it falls on the armed forces of the world to impose order and prevent a collapse. But before we get into that, let's take a look at their archetypal worldviews. So first up, we have conventional worlds. This is depicted as 1776 Adam Smith ideals. It's represented by market optimism and a hidden and enlightened hand. Motto, don't worry, be happy. And then of course we have policy reform, which is depicted by Maynard Keynes. Growth, environment, equity through better tech and management. But let's move on to barbarism. Breakdown is depicted by Malthus. Now, that right there is pretty ominous. The Malthusians are the ones who advocate for depopulation, you know, the Malthusian death cult that runs parallel to Agenda 2030 and the limits to growth. Their motto is the end is coming. So yeah, that's nice. So then we have Fortress World. This is depicted by the ideal of Thomas Hobbes. Social chaos, the nasty nature of men, and order through strong leaders, i.e. a dictator. Cool. So their great transition that they're aiming for is represented by eco-utopia, and yeah, that's depicted by utopians such as Gandhi. And their philosophy is human goodness, the evil of industrialization, and motto is small is beautiful. And of course, the next one is the Sustainable Development Timeline. And so this is depicted by social evolution. Their motto is human solidarity, new values, and the art of living, which more than likely is the universal basic income crowd. Just give everyone money to live and they can focus on finger painting and pottery, I guess. I don't know. And then right here they have muddling through, depicted by quote-unquote your brother-in-law, probably. So whoever wrote this really hates their brother-in-law, I guess. As he says, they have no grand philosophy. Their motto is Que Sera Sera, which just means whatever will be, will be. So yeah, some interesting family dynamics right there. And I quote, "The dark belief that underscores the breakdown variant is that the world will face an unprecedented calamity, in which population and economic growth leads to ecological collapse, rampaging conflict, and institutional disintegration." And so yes, that's why it's dictated by Thomas Malthus. It's all about the limits to growth. Okay, so let's move on to the fortress world. This mindset was foreshadowed by the philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, who held a pessimistic view of the nature of man, and saw the need for powerful leadership. While it is rare to find modern Hobbesians, many people do believe that some kind of fortress world is the logical outcome. So, on that note, let's jump to barbarism and the abyss. The initial driving force propelling these scenarios are the same for all scenarios. However, the momentum for sustainability and a revised development agenda, which seemed so compelling at the close of the 20th century, collapses. The warning bells, environmental degradation, climate change, social issues, and terrorism are rung, but not heeded. Yes, instead of rectifying today's environmental and socio-economic tensions, a multi-dimensional crisis ensues. Yeah, they talk about this all the time. The polycrisis of doom, the crisis of everything. And so they go on to say, as this crisis unfolds, a key uncertainty is the reaction of the remaining powerful institutions, country alliances, transnational corporations, international organizations, and armed forces. And so in this breakdown variant, their response is fragmented as conflict overwhelms all efforts to impose order. However, in Fortress World, powerful regional and international actors are able to muster a sufficiently organized response to protect their own interest and create long-lasting alliances. And so, as a result, the world views force as a necessity to prevent the corrosive erosion of wealth, resources, and governance systems. The elite retreat to their protective enclaves, mostly in historically rich nations, but in favored enclaves in poor nations as well. So yeah, just keep in mind, this is what they think is really going to happen. And so to finish up, let's read through this scenario, because many people believe this is what we have in store for us. And I quote, "By 2002, the market euphoria of the last decade of the 20th century seems like a naive and giddy dream. A global economic recession chastens the irrational exuberance of dot-com investors, and the 9/11 terrorist attack awakens a sleepwalking global elite to deep fissures cutting across the geopolitical landscape. The nations of the world, mobilized in a cooperative effort to fight terrorism, are offered an unexpected opportunity to redirect development strategy and commit to a form of globalization that is more inclusive, democratic, and sustainable. But they do not seize it. The moment of unity and possibility is squandered in a frenzy of militarism, suspicion, and polarization. The empty rhetoric of the Earth Summit in 2002 is an obituary for the lost era of sustainable development. Gradually, a coordinated campaign is able to control terrorism at a quote-unquote manageable level, although episodic attacks periodically invigorate the politics of fear. The mantra of economic growth, trade liberalization, and structural adjustments continues to be heard in the halls of global governance organizations such as the WTO, the boardrooms of transnational corporations, and the corridors of national governments. The old ideology of individualism and consumerism flourishes anew, but with a greater respect for government, as they are the only ones who can guarantee national and individual security. But it is a bifurcated form of economic globalization, limited largely to a so-called 2020 club. The 20% of nations that are rich and the 20% of the elite in nations that are not. The global economy spawns a new class of internationally connected affluent elite. However, there is a counterpoint, the billions and billions of desperately poor whose boats fail to rise with the general economic tide. Some international agencies and some governments continue to mount programs aimed at reducing poverty, promoting entrepreneurship, and modernizing institutions. But with financial and political priorities oriented toward security and control, the efforts are woefully inadequate. And so, as the level of poverty increases and the gulf between the rich and poor widens, development aid continues to decline. Yes, the remnants of the institutional capacity and moral commitment to global welfare are completely lost. Meanwhile, environmental conditions degrade. Multiple stresses, pollution, climate change, ecosystem degradation, well, they all interact and amplify the crisis. Disputes over scarce water sources feed conflict in regions with shared river basins. Environmental degradation, food insecurity, and emergent diseases foster a vast health crisis. And so, where are we headed? Well, tantalized by media images of opulence and dreams of affluence, the excluded billions grow restive. Many seek immigration to affluent centers by any means necessary. Criminal activity thrives in anarchy-type conditions, with some powerful global syndicates able to field fearsome fighting units in their battle against international policing activities. Yes, we have a new kind of militant, educated, excluded, and angry. Well, that fans the flames of discontent. The poison of social polarization deepens. Terrorism resurges, escalating waves of suicide attacks at popular gatherings and on symbols of globalization. And it even extends to the use of biological and nuclear weapons. In this atmosphere of deepening social and environmental crisis, conflict feeds off of old ethnic, religious, and nationalistic tensions. Poor countries begin to fragment as civil order collapses, and various forms of criminal anarchy fill the vacuum. Even some of the most prosperous nations feel the sting as infrastructure decays and technology fails. And from there, the global economy sputters and international institutions weaken, while the bite of climate change and environmental devastation grows fiercer. The affluent minority fears it too, will be engulfed by rampant migration, violence, and disease. The global crisis spins out of control.
One says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
And then, right here is where it gets good, and I quote, "The forces of global order take action, international military, corporate, and governance bodies, supported by the most powerful national governments. Well, they form some kind of alliance for global salvation. Using a revamped UN as their platform, a state of planetary emergency is declared, which, by the way, they just broadened the scope of their planetary emergency like last week, we just talked about it. Anyway, a campaign of overwhelming force, rough justice, and draconian police measures sweeps through hotspots of conflict and discontent. And so, with as-needed military and reconstruction support from the Alliance, local forces nearly everywhere are able to subdue resistance and impose stability backed by international peacekeeping units. So yeah, UN soldiers in the streets. Very cool. I mean, I just can't wait for this future. It's going to be so great. And so, they say this brings about a system of global dualism. Some call it a fortress world, others a planetary apartheid. And this is what emerges from the crisis. The separate spheres of haves and have-nots, the included and excluded, are codified in asymmetrical and authoritarian legal and institutional frameworks. The affluent live in protected enclaves in rich nations and in strongholds in poor nations. There are bubbles of privilege amidst oceans of misery. In this police state outside the fortress, the majority is mired in poverty and denied basic freedoms. The authorities use high-tech surveillance and old-fashioned brutality to control social unrest and migration. And so they say the elite have halted barbarism at the gate and enforced a kind of environmental management of uneasy stability. Now, in the last section here, they have an anticipated history lesson on our current time period. They talk about how this whole transition might be viewed in the history books during the year 2068 in a new supercity called Mandela City. In this, they say the crisis started in 2015. Now they say that global reform lasted between 2015 and 2025. The Great Transition starts in 2025. This is insane. They say, and I quote, "In the Cultural Revolution of the mid-2020s, lifestyles and even taste began to change." So, yes, that's what we're dealing with right now, a cultural revolution. In 2002, they predicted this would happen by the mid-2020s, and we're here right now. Damn, that was a good prediction. Or was it intentionally created? That is always the question, because it's tough to tell when the solution can also be viewed as the motive. However, they end the paper with this right here, and I quote, "The exuberance of market optimists who once wielded such influence has long ago been revealed as a dangerous absurdity. The utopian dreams of a post-capitalist paradise have also, as they must, been defied. The old reformers who gathered at the Earth Summit and 1,000 other conferences to design management strategies for a sustainable and human future, well, it could only take us part of the way. And so, in their eyes, people defied their utopian dreams, and the future is still uncertain. The timeless drama of life continues, with all the contradictions of the human condition, the hopes and heartbreaks, the triumphs and failures, the beginnings and the endings. However, the drama unfolds in a theater of historic possibility that few would trade. It is of little wonder as to why we so abundantly honor the struggles and achievements of our parents and grandparents. Now our own generation grows perplexed and troubled by the youth of today, with their cultural rebelliousness, political restlessness, and a search for a new challenge. Are they the harbingers of a new transition struggling to be born? Or are they destined to lead the world into barbarism and breakdown? Only time will tell. Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.